Hello and welcome to this webinar where we're going to introduce the Tungsten Replicator AMI. My name is Chris Parker. I'm the Customer Success Director for EMEA and APAC here at Continuent. So the topics we're going to discuss in this short session. First of all, I'm just going to have a quick overview of what the replicator is and what it can do. And then we're going to go straight into looking at the Tungsten Replicator AMI, what it is and what it isn't. I'll do a demonstration of how to configure it, and then just a few frequently asked questions that we get regarding the replicator. So first of all, what is Tungsten Replicator? If you're familiar with Continuent, then you should be fairly familiar with what the Tungsten Replicator is. It has been around for many, many years. It's gone through various changes, improvements along the way, but ultimately, it's a high performance, it's proven replication engine for MySQL. Now, the Tungsten Replicator itself is core to Tungsten clustering. So if you're familiar with Tungsten clustering, if you use it, if you're a customer, then you'll be familiar with the replicator. It's part and parcel of the cluster. It's how we move the data around. But it can also be used as a standalone asynchronous replicator as well. Now, obviously, we can extract and apply from and to all flavors of MySQL. So that's Percona, MariaDB, Enterprise, Community Edition. We can extract as well and apply into Amazon RDS Aurora. We can work with Google Cloud Services, and we can work with Microsoft Azure. We can replicate between different cloud environments as well. So you could have your source on Amazon RDS, for example, and your target on Google Cloud, and that's absolutely fine, and we can do that. We also have the ability to replicate to many heterogeneous targets, and I'll talk about that on a later slide, the various different targets that we can work with. We also have advanced filtering within the replicator. Now sometimes it's confusing as to whether we're an ETL product or a replication product. We're definitely not ETL. That's a very different technology and a type of approach. However, we do offer filtering, which could lend itself to an ETL type function. So some basic transformations of data, filtering data in, filtering data out. So some basic work we can do on the fly with the data, but we don't see ourselves as ETL in the true sense of that word. We can also work with some advanced topologies. So we can do fan in and fan out. So fan in, if you have multiple sources replicating into a single target, or you have one source replicating out to multiple targets. That all of those combinations are achievable, and the targets in any of those topologies can be any of the supported targets, and it could be a mix of them. So for example, you could do a fan out where you have a single MySQL source and your targets, you could have a Redshift target, an Oracle target, and a MySQL target. They can all be different. They don't have to be the same. So just a little high-level view of how we move the data. So this is how it would work with our JDBC targets. So when we're applying into MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, that kind of thing. You have here your source database, and from your source, your database is generating binary logs, and our replicator extracts transactions from the binary logs. So we're transactionally consistent, so we will only extract a full completed transaction upon commit, and then we will convert that into THL, which is our transaction history log. That will then be picked up by the appliers. So the extractors, we don't push the data, the appliers pull the data across. So the applier will pull that THL across from the extractor. It will extract the THL and process it and apply it into the target database. And the beauty of THL is because it's our own native format, we have that flexibility of being able to transfer it and convert it into statements and data that is applicable to the target that we're applying into, hence why we're able to be quite so powerful with our heterogeneous capabilities. You see here we have two slightly different lines. We have obviously from the database to the binary logs to the extractor, and then we have this blue line. This blue dotted line here is typically how we would work in an AWS Aurora environment where we don't have access to the binary logs. In this instance, we would be able to extract the binary log information through the various database calls that you can access within the database itself, and we're able to pull that information across, hence how we're able to work with Aurora. In terms of batch targets, so this example here is showing Vertica, but this would be similar for Vertica, for Redshift, for Hadoop. We would extract the information in exactly the same way. The applier, however, this time would work slightly differently. Now, this is obviously a Vertica example here. For Vertica, this THL is extracted and written down into CSV information. The CSV is then loaded up into what we call staging tables. And then this JDBC process applies calls to Vertica, which merges those staging data into the base table so that you have a replica of the data as it was from the source in your target. And each of our batch targets works slightly differently because of the capabilities of the target. So Vertica and Redshift, for example, you can't do inserts and updates on row information as easily. It's not as performant, hence why we do this batch loading of data, because these kinds of targets perform much better when you're working with larger subsets of data. So that's a very, very high level view of how the replicators work. We do have a lot more information on this on our documentation pages on our website, and we have various webinars as well that dig deeper into the inner workings of the replicator. So I'm not going to go any deeper than this. I want to get on to the source of the session today, which is the AMI. But before I do that, let's look at what sources and targets we can work with, as that will then determine how you can use the AMI. So as I've mentioned, we can extract from all of these kinds of sources. So all the variants of MySQL, Amazon RDS, Amazon Aurora, Google Cloud and Azure. And then we can replicate into everything you see here. So all of the same points that we extract from, but then also Oracle, ClickHouse, Hadoop, Mongo. MongoDB also includes Atlas. So we were able to apply into Atlas. Vertica, Postgres, including AWS Postgres. And then obviously Kafka and Redshift. So they're all valid targets, and these are our valid sources. So let's look at the AMI. So what is it? Well, if you're familiar with Amazon AMIs or Amazon Machine Images, it is what it implies. It's an image. It's a snapshot image of a instance. In this case, it will be a fully functional EC2 instance. And on that instance, when you launch it, will be a fully configured version of Tungsten Replicator for whichever source or target you've subscribed to. On the host itself, all the prerequisites are in place. So the operating system user set up, all the various directory structures there, all the bits of software you need, the Ruby, the Java, and any client binaries that are required based on the target. Everything is there ready for you to go. You launch it, you'll be presented with a wizard, and away you go, and we'll look at that in the next few slides. So what it isn't, it's not a database. Okay, so we don't provide you with any database software. There's no MySQL on the sources. The MySQL client libraries are there to be able to extract, but we don't actually have a database installed. So if you're using the AMI, typically you would already have your MySQL database to extract from, and you would already have whatever your target is that you want to write into, and then the AMIs would sit in the middle and do the work for you. However, upon launching the instances, if you wanted to install the various MySQL on the instances yourself, you can do. There's absolutely no problem with doing that. We just don't provide that for you. Okay. So how do you subscribe? Well, you can go to the Amazon Marketplace. So the link is there. That will take you straight to it. And once you're there, just search for Tungsten. Okay, and you will find all of the AMIs available. And what you will need, typically a pipe, when we talk about a replication pipeline, we think about the source and the target. And for each pipeline, you will need one extractor. So you'll need a subscription for the MySQL source extraction, and then you'll need a subscription for your applier to write into your target. So you would go through the marketplace, you'll find Tungsten Replicator for MySQL source, subscribe to that, and then you'll look for Tungsten Replicator for whatever applier target you're looking for and subscribe to that. Once you have those two instances launched in your region, you can then set them up. And we have a launch wizard. So when you log in, obviously, first of all, as I mentioned on 2 slides earlier, you need to make sure your databases are ready. If you're going to install them on the local EC2 instance you've just launched, fair enough, do that. But if you're not, you still need to make sure that they're available and that there's a number of MySQL prerequisites need to be in place in your database. And there's potentially various prerequisites in place on your targets. So things like database users so that we can extract information or we can apply information, things like that. So just these doc pages here will explain what you need in place on your source and targets. So if you launched your EC2, log in using the EC2 user, sudo up as the Tungsten user, and as soon as you've done that, the launch wizard will begin. And it will just prompt you for various questions where the source is, usernames, various properties that you want to set. And once you've answered all of that, it will build the configuration for you. And then it will just present you with the final steps you need to run to install the software. Once it's installed, start the replicator and away you go. It's simple as that. How do you get help? Well, I've already alluded to the documentation. There's quite a lot of it available online. So there's you can view the docs here. When you first launch an AMI as well, the AMI comes with a 14-day free trial period. During those 14 days, we will also provide you with support directly from Continuent. So if you need help during that 14-day period, email support@continuent.com. Just put in the subject line that you need assistance with the AMI. So when it comes through, we can see it's AMI. And then just make sure it's not urgent. Okay, so our support team, we're supporting many of our customers and they may be placing urgent support cases and they will need to get priority. Obviously they're in production. AMI's, your 14-day free trial period is intended to be kind of like a POC, and therefore we will help you, but obviously you need to appreciate that it won't necessarily be for urgent cases. There's also some community support available from our Google forums, and you can get help from there. So let's do a quick demonstration of how the product works. Okay, so if you click on the link that I showed you in the slides, it will bring you to this page, our Continuent page on the AWS Marketplace. Alternatively, you can navigate through to the Marketplace in whatever method you're familiar with. But once you're there, you can search for Tungsten, or on this page, you'll see all of our information. And here you can see all of the AMIs, so the MySQL targets, MySQL source. We even have AMIs for clustering. There is another webinar as a getting started guide for the clustering AMI, so I'm not going to cover that here, but we have the replicator for Redshift, Mongo, Postgres, etc. So all of the various sources and targets are there. So as I mentioned, you need one subscription to for each MySQL source, and then you need one for whichever targets. Now in this demonstration, I'm going to just keep it simple, and I'm going to do a MySQL to MySQL replication. I've already subscribed to and launched these instances, so I'm not going to, just for speed really, so I'm not going to go through that now. But if you click on each individual AMI, it will bring up a lot more information for you. So the product overview, what you can do with it. There's also information on pricing, so you can estimate how much it would cost you after the free trial period, usage information, support information, etc. So all of that is there for you. A link to the AMI documentation. All that information is there, so you can go through all of that. When you're happy, you can click on continue to subscribe, go through the various steps that AWS present to you, the various things that you need to accept, and then eventually you can launch the AMI in whichever region that you want to launch it in. Now this is my EC2 dashboard. I already have the AMI here. Let me just sort this again. So I've got my extractor launched and that's running, and my applier is launched and running. And for the purpose of this demonstration, I've got databases here. I've got app01, which is my database I'm going to write into, and ext01, which is the database I'm going to read out of. Okay, so what we're going to do now is going to switch to my console, and I will talk you through how we start configuring these AMIs. Okay, so here I have console sessions connected to the two databases. So I have ext01 and app01. And if I just do things like show databases on here now, my databases are empty. I haven't got any information in them. They're just clean installs, and they're ready to go. In terms of the prerequisites for MySQL, I have created users. So if I select user host from MySQL.user, you can see I've created a Tungsten user. This is explained in our docs for prerequisites, the users and the permissions that you need, but obviously you need these users because we need to be able to connect to the database, to extract metadata, to read from the bin logs. In terms of applying, we obviously need the writer privileges to apply into the various databases that you're writing into and replicating. So that's kind of all set up and that's ready to go. And just to show that we are on two different hosts, ext01, app01. So what I'm going to do now is over here, I've got this set up so I can make a connection. This here on the left-hand side is the IP address of the extractor AMI that I set up, and this is the applier. So we'll do the extractor first. You log in and you'll get this, the welcome screen. And the first thing we're going to do, you see we're connected as the EC2 user, is we're just going to sudo up as Tungsten. Okay, what happens now? You get a little README. We'll just run through a few of the reminders, things that we've already spoken about, making sure the prerequisites are in place, etc. And there's also a link to the docs, and I will do the same over here. We're ready, and everything is set up. So do we want to continue with the configuration wizard? Yes. So I'm just going to do the extractor first, and then we'll come back to the applier. So it's saying that it's detected the current host name is this, and this is my internal IP address. Do we want to change the host name, or do we want to accept the current one? I'm actually going to change my host name, and I'm just going to call it extractor 01. Okay, and that will automatically change the host name for you, so you don't need to do that later. It will do the various things. So it now wants to know a service name. So when we set up replication, I briefly mentioned the word pipeline earlier, and we talk about a pipeline being the link between a source and a target. And that pipeline is effectively a service, and it needs a service name. Service name can be anything you want. It's just alphanumerics, something meaningful. So if you were to look in, if you had multiple pipelines running, you can name the pipelines after various business functions that the databases relate to, whatever you want. For demonstration purposes, I tend to always use alpha, beta, etc. So I'm just going to use alpha. But whatever service name we have here on the extractor, we need to use it the same on the other side, and you'll see that when we set up the applier. Do I want to enable SSL? I'm going to say no for this, but you can enable SSL between the replicators if you wish. So we're configuring the extractor. What kind of extractor are we configuring? Are we doing a standalone remote host? So that would include extracting from Google and anything that's outside of AWS. And it would also include like the EC2 instances that I've set up with databases on it. So I'm going to do a standalone remote because my databases are on separate hosts. Is it a standalone local? So this is if you wanted to install MySQL on this host, you can do that, but you must do it before you start running this wizard, okay? Or are we extracting from RDS MySQL or Aurora MySQL? So as I mentioned, I'm going to do remote host. Again, it reminds you to make sure that your database is set up with various prerequisites. Please enter the host name for the remote MySQL host. So this is the host name for this host here, so ext01. Okay, so we're going to pop that in there. And it needs to know the IP address of that host. Now, this is the internal IP address for Amazon, not the external IP address that you would connect to. So in my case, it is 10.2.3.59. What database is MySQL database running on? So if you want to just double check the port you're on, just in case you're not familiar, just do select that port, shows the database is running on 3306, so that's all good. So then what we do is here, we put in, we can either type in 3306 or we can just accept the default. So I'll just press enter to accept the default. The database user for the replicator, so this is what we're going to extract from. So we saw from over here that I'd set up these Tungsten users. So I'm just going to say, hit enter on there and accept the default. Type in the password for that user, type it in again to make sure you've got it right. And we have the THL port. So this is the port that the THL is transferred between the source and the target. So the default is 2112, so I'm going to accept that. But what it's important to point out at this point here is when you set up your EC2 instances, you need to make sure that the security groups are configured, okay? So between the extractor, so the host we're on now, and your source database, you need to make sure that we can communicate on port 3306. Between the extractor and the applier, we need to make sure that we can communicate on port 2112 and this RMI port 1001 or whatever values you specify. The RMI port is the communications port between the replicators. Similarly, then on the applier, you will need to make sure that you have the relevant ports open to reach out to whatever your target is. So 3306 if it's MySQL, or whatever the port is for your target. So the next question is THL log retention in days. So how long do we want to keep THL logs on disk for? Think of THL logs like the MySQL binary logs. Typically, I would recommend keep the THL log retention the same as your binary log retention, or a little bit less, okay? If you have an issue and the THL logs get deleted and we need them, as long as you have the binary logs, we can regenerate them. If you lose the binary logs, we can't regenerate THL. So I would always err on the side of caution and have more binary logs than THL if disk space is an issue, but otherwise try and keep them the retention the same. So we'll go for 7 days. I'll just accept the default there. How much memory do we want to allocate to the Java process? The default is 1024 or 1 gig. I would keep that. In 99% of cases, that should be sufficient, okay? So we also have this ability to auto recover. So if a replicator goes offline for any reason, if it goes into an error state, we can enable auto recovery where the replicator will attempt to bring itself back online. And if you want to enable that, it's disabled by default. So do we want to enable it? Let's say yes. So what will happen now is we get asked, how do we want to configure auto recovery? So how many times do you want auto recovery to try? So, if you enable auto recovery, the replicator won't just sit there forever retrying. If it goes into an error state, it will retry this number of times before it eventually gives up and says, actually, you know what, I can't recover. So let's try and recover for 10 times, which is also the default. And then how much time do you want between auto recovery attempts? The default is 5 seconds. I'll accept the default. And what this means is If auto recovery fails to recover on the first attempt, it'll wait 5 seconds before it retries again. And that's sometimes handy because in the case where I'm working here on a remote host, maybe my remote host goes down for some reason, it crashes, auto recovery kicks in and the database hasn't come back up yet, so it doesn't carry on working. But if we wait and wait and wait and keep retrying, MySQL eventually restarts, auto recovery will succeed. Will this be a heterogeneous pipeline? So if you're replicating to anything other than MySQL, then say yes here. As I'm replicating to MySQL, I'm going to say no. There are lots and lots of filters with the replicator. I talked about this briefly on one of the slides about how we're not ETL, but we do have various filters in place. One of the most common filters in replication pipelines is the replicate filter. And the replicate filter enables you to exclude certain schemas or certain tables. We can even go down as far as column level. I mean, the replicate filter doesn't work at column level. The replicate filter is purely schema or table. It's a different filter for columns. But if you wish to enable that, it gives you the option to enable that now. I'm going to say yes, I want to enable it. And then do I want to do replicate.do or replicate.ignore? If I say replicate.do, it will only replicate the schemas and or tables that we then define. If I say ignore, it will replicate everything except the schemas or tables that I define. Okay, you can't really mix and match the two, it's one or the other. But what I'm going to say is I'm going to say replicate.do. And then I list comma separated list of the objects that you want to replicate. Now this can be a mix. I'm just going to say I just want to replicate the HR schema, but if I wanted to, I could say, well, replicate the HR schema, and in the demo schema I have a table called audit log and I want to replicate that as well. So this can be a comma separated list of schemas and or tables and a mix of the both. Just be sure that if it's tables that you fully qualify it with the table schema.table name, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to say replicate.do for the HR schema. Okay, that's configured the everything I need for the extractor. It's now saying the next steps, cd into this directory and run tools tpm install. However, if you want, the wizard will do that for you. Do you want the wizard to do it now, yes or no? I'm just going to pause there. I'm not going to say yes and I'm not going to say no. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to configure my applier and get that ready, and then I will say yes and get these installed at the same time. So do you wish to proceed with the configuration wizard? Yes. Oops, it's not scrolling very well there on my screen. There we go. So my current host name is that, exit. My current IP address is that. Do we want to enter a new host name? I'm going to say yes, because obviously at some point when I've been getting ready for this webinar, I've somehow stupidly can't change my host name without even realizing it. So do I want to change the host name? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to call it applier 01. Okay, so service name alpha. Remember we used alpha on the extractor. I'm not going to enable SSL because I didn't enable it on the extractor. So if you enable it on the extractor, you have to enable it on the applier. Okay, you can't have one with it and one without it. So first of all, are we configuring this to work with a tungsten cluster? Okay, so if you're familiar with tungsten clustering and you want to replicate from a tungsten cluster to a Redshift node, for example, you can do that with the applier AMI. Okay, and this will give you the option to do that. And I'm going to say no because obviously my source is I'm going to work with a single standard pipeline. So first of all, it needs to know about the extractor. So what is the host name of the extractor? And we called that extractor 01. And it wants to know what the IP of the extractor is. And it's here in the output on the left-hand side. So I can just type that in, 10.2.3.86. THL port. Again, if you change the THL, so if the extractor can work on a different THL port if you wish. So if you've changed the extractor THL port, put that in here. I've left it at 2112, so I'm going to leave it. Is the source database RDS or Aurora? It's not. And then what am I applying into? So am I applying into a standalone remote host, local RDS, or an existing Continuent cluster? So I'm going to apply into a remote host. And then it wants to know about that the applier database. So it was called app01. And the IP address for app01, I'm just going to grab that from my AWS dashboard, and that is 10.2.3.228. And then what port is my database running on? 306. The user, again, it was Tungsten. Put the password in here. The THL port that we want to run on the applier, I'll leave that the default, and the AMI port the default. THL log retention, we left that as default. The amount of memory, accept the default. Auto recovery, so let's enable auto recovery here as well, and we'll use the same default values, 10 and 5. And then we've got the option of putting the replicate filter here as well. Now, there are two ways that the filters, you can either apply a filter at extraction, or you can apply a filter during the apply stage. Because I've enabled the replicate filter on my extractor, I don't need to apply it on the applier as well. So I'll say no at this point. However, what's important to know is if we're doing, say, a fan out, okay, you'll take the scenario, you have one humongous data warehouse as your source, and you want to set up the replicator to replicate out to 4 different targets, a MySQL target, a Redshift target, a Kafka stream, an Oracle, but you want to filter the data differently. So the MySQL target will receive different data on the replication stream to the Redshift target. At this point, you would apply the filtering on the applier stage, because you would want to replicate, the extractor would need to replicate everything it needs for all of the various targets, but then the appliers would then pick out the bits that it needs from that stream, if that makes sense. So you would, in a fan out situation, you would probably have the filter on both sides. In our case, we've already configured the filter on the extractor, so we're just going to say no on the applier. Okay, and there we go, everything's done. So do we want to do the installation? Do we want to start it? So let's go over to the extractor and say yes. And that will do the tools TPM install for us. We'll just take a moment or two. Things it will do here, it will be reaching out to the database and checking that the database is reachable, the username, passwords are correct. And it will also be making sure that it can reach to the, it can communicate to the applier. Now, what we've appeared here from the TPM are a couple of warnings. It's detected that there are a few database settings that don't quite match what we would recommend. We say warnings because they're not essential. It won't break the replication. Replication will still work fine. It's just recommendations for things like open files. If you want to go and change that, you can fix that. Otherwise, you can accept it. If it was a violation or a missing prerequisite that was essential, it would come up here with an error, and the installation would stop until you fixed it, and then you would need to rerun the install. Just going to run it over here on the applier as well. So we see the installation's finished. It's come up with next steps, so you can now start the replicator, and yeah. So we'll wait for the applier to finish, and then we will do that. Okay, so that's the extractor, and the applier has now been installed. So what I'm going to do, just for simplicity, I'm just going to log out of the Tungsten user, and then I'm going to reconnect as Tungsten. And this is just purely to make sure that the hostname change has come into effect, as we can see here. And if we type hostname, okay, but it's also to preload the environment variables. Part of this installation will have updated the bash profile. So if we cat you'll see it's added this line at the bottom here, which just loads up the environment. I could have manually sourced this script up here, but I wanted to just log out and log back in again just to make sure it loads successfully on login. Once we've done that, we can simply start the replicator. So we're going to do replicator start over here, and we will do replicator start over here. See the replicator service, it's said it's started. We now have a simple command line method for looking at the status of a replicator. So trepctl status. And this gives us some information so we can see what binary log we're currently extracting from and the position. Our applied last sequence number, I'll talk about that in a second. We can see our host name, our THL URI that the applier will be using. Pipeline source, so this can tell us EXT01, it's the database we're connected to. We are in the role of the primary role, and we're online. If the replicator goes offline for any reason, the state here would change to offline, and you would usually see more information here in the pending error output. So sequence numbers. So every transaction that we extract from the binary log is given a unique sequence number. That unique sequence number then stays with it through the entire replication pipeline. So you can always tie a particular transaction from a Tungsten sequence number to a MySQL bin log position. Now at the moment we're 0 because it's a quiet database. I've just installed it. Nothing's happening yet. Let's just make sure the applier is looking healthy. And it is. That's also online. That's good. We have some latency figures here. Latency is going to be creeping up at the moment because I've got no data flowing through the pipeline. So you would expect to see that, but as data flows, you'll see those changes a little bit easier. So let's go and put some data in. So let's go back to my databases over here. So we did the show databases earlier. Let me just run that show databases again. Oops. Okay, we can now see we have a new database, Tungsten Alpha. The replicator has created this. This is used for tracking, so it's our internal metadata tracking schema. If I use Tungsten Alpha and show tables, just a small number of tables. The number of tables won't grow. These tables won't grow out of control. Trep commit seek no table will only ever have one row in it, and that will always be on the extractor. It will relate to the last event we extracted, and on the applier, it will relate to the last event we applied. And that is useful so that if the replicator, the applier, is rebooted, the host reboots, whatever happens, when the replicator comes back online, it will check this table and say, what was the last thing that I did? And it will carry on from there, okay? So you don't really need to worry about this schema. It won't grow out of control. It will just be there with very small amounts of metadata. So I'm going to create database HR. That was the database I said we're going to replicate. And if I show databases, sorry. Okay, HR is there. If I look over here on my applier now, we can see the HR database is there, so we know that's replicating. So let's create some tables. So I'm just going to grab some DDL that I've pre-written for simplicity. Okay, just copy that in there. So I've created two tables, a regions table and a countries table. If I do use HR over here, show tables, we can see those two tables have appeared. Select star from regions, nothing in it at the moment. So let me grab some insert statements. We'll do a couple of inserts into regions. And then we can do that select from regions, and we can see the data is replicated. So we know replication is going, so that's great. We're up and running. But let's have a quick look at the statuses over here, and let's just go through a few more little bits of information for you. So we'll do the status again. And this time we can see the sequence number is incremented to 5 because we've got data. Our applied latency came down because obviously we did some work. So that's good. Everything is looking happy there. But then what do we do if we want to see what this THL looks like? So opt continuent THL, and there'll be a directory under there for the service. So in my case, alpha. And in there, we have THL files. Now, these files, you can't just open these files and read them. Okay, they're kind of binary files, so there's nothing you can do there. But if you wanted to see what THL was, there is a command called THL. And from THL, you can interrogate what's in this file. So I'm going to just say THL list -seek now, and I'm going to look at sequence number 5 because that's the last sequence number that we have. And there we go. We can see this is a typical piece of THL. So the file number, sorry, the file name that this sequence number is in, the commit timestamp here. This is the actual bin log and bin log position that this transaction was taken from, and this is where it came from, the source, a bit of metadata about the environment, and then the actual statement itself. So it was an insert into the HR table, to the HR schema, to the regions table. There's only one row, and this is the data. It's showing us showing the character set conversion hasn't done. So if I just do char set ASCII, they will change it into ASCII text so you can see what the actual values were. And that's pretty much it. So that's, you can look at THL from there. There are lots of other different ways you can look at the replication status outputs. There's a lot of information about this in our doc pages, so I would highly recommend you go and review those. But also, if you need help, you can reach out to us on the various channels. So with that, I'm going to switch back to my presentation, and we will just wrap things up. Okay, I hope you found that useful. So just to wrap up, I just want to go through a few frequently asked questions that we sometimes get regarding Replicator in general, but also the AMI more specifically. So can you extract from other types of databases such as Oracle and Postgres? No, we can't. We can only extract from MySQL. Okay. Can you install the replicator on your existing database hardware? Not with the AMI, you can't. So if you want to use the AMI against your existing databases, the AMI would need to be launched on the EC2 instance that you launch from the marketplace. However, if you want to install on your existing database hardware, it is possible to do that, but you would need a subscription to the commercial release of the software instead. So if that's something you want to do, come to us via sales@continuent.com, and we can discuss those options. Can you install the applier and the extractor on the same host? Again, not with the AMI, but you can with a subscription to the commercial release. Do we have AMIs in other cloud providers? Not yet, but it is something we're looking into. So as soon as we have more information on that, we will let you know. Can I customize the installation? Absolutely. The wizard that runs at the beginning is there just to give you a kind of a basic starting point, but there are many other properties that you can change and tune and tweak. There are many different filters you can add. You can even create your own. What I would recommend is look through the online docs for the replicator, and all the various properties and things that you can tune and how to do it. They're all explained in the doc pages. So in summary, what have we learned? Well, we've reviewed Tungsten Replicator. We've explored the various sources and targets available with the AMI. We've learned what the AMI actually is, and we've worked out and seen how to launch it and get started. So what are our next steps? Well, obviously get over to the Amazon Marketplace and get started. It's as simple as that. If you have any further questions, or if you'd like to discuss a commercial subscription instead, please do reach out to us at sales@continuent.com, and we'll be more than happy to help. If you want any other information, this is our details here. My name, Chris Parker, is here. My email address, and feel free to reach out to us. We're available to answer questions and to give you guidance. If you're unsure whether the AMI is best for you, just ask. We're always happy to help. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and I hope to speak to you very soon. Thank you and goodbye.